My name is Elaine Pendergrass. My background is in education and children's ministry, so it's fun to kind of merge those and work them together. If you have children at home, and even if you don't, if your children are grown and maybe you have grandkids, one important thing that you can do at Christmas to celebrate the birth of Jesus is to not even open one present until you've read the birth narrative, the stories of when Jesus was born. They're found in Matthew and in Luke. But sometimes you may think, oh, this is too much, it's too long, the kids won't understand it, all of those kind of things. So I thought I would model for you how to share these stories with your kids so that they'll pay attention and so that they understand what's happening. So the first birth narrative is found in the book of Matthew. If you were in my class, I'd say let's open to Matthew in the skinny part of the Bible, the first book of the New Testament. In Matthew, the beginning of the chapter, in chapter 1, talks about Jesus's background, so his genealogy, all the people he's related to. And then it talks about Joseph accepting Jesus when he wasn't sure what to do, when he knew that Mary was not married yet, but Mary had a baby in her tummy. And so let's read let's read chapter 2, starting in verse 1, and I'll read it and I'll kind of do what I would do if I had a child sitting beside me. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Do you remember that word Bethlehem? We've seen that word before. Bethlehem is the place Jesus was born. What town were you born in? And they might say Kewanee, or they might say Sarasota, or they might say Greenville, who knows? But remind them that they were born in a place as well. And the place that Jesus was born was called Bethlehem. And the people that came from the east were called Magi. They weren't kings. They weren't wise men. Thankfully, this version says it correctly. It says Magi. But Magi were the guys that studied the stars. And the stars told them, in this case, that there was a new king born. So they went to this guy named Herod, who was a king. And he was actually a pretty mean king. They asked him, "Where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So you can imagine if you were a king, do you think you would want some other king to be born and take over your job? And your kids are probably saying, no. So let's see what this king does. In verse 2, it says, "When King Herod heard this, he was very disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him." That means everybody was upset. King Herod was upset, so everybody's upset. Kind of like when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. When he called together the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Messiah means kind of the one that came to save. Sometimes you'll hear Jesus called Jesus Christ. Christ and Messiah mean kind of the same thing, that Jesus was the one who came to save them. So King Herod didn't know about this, so he called on people called chief priests and people of the law, people who knew the law. So that's the Jewish people that are around that knew what the Bible said. And so he called on them to see what answer they would give. And they said, "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." And then they read from something from the Old Testament. "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." So this talks about how there will be somebody that comes up who gets to take care of all the people in Israel and the whole area where Jesus lived. And he would be like a shepherd. I wonder who that person will be. Maybe your kids will say Jesus. If not, you just wonder with them. Verse 7, "Then Herod called the Magi." What are Magi? Oh yeah, they're those guys that were studying the stars. They're the ones that went to Herod, remember? "Then Herod, that king, called the Magi secretly and found from them the exact time that the star appeared." So he must have said, "What time did you see it? Was it, late at night, early in the morning? When did you see it?" And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him too." Do you think that's really what he wanted to do? Probably not, because he was not happy that there was a new king being born. There's more about that later in the chapter, but we won't read that right now. Verse 9, "After they," that's the Magi, "heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was." So how did the Magi find their way to this place in Bethlehem where this Jesus was? A star led them, a star in the sky. "When they saw the star, they were overjoyed." That means they were super excited. "On coming to the house, they saw the child." Who's that child? Jesus, that's right, with his mother. Do you remember her name? Her name was Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. So he really was special, right? If these guys who were smart guys got down on their knees and bowed down like he was a king, he must have been very special, huh? Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They even brought very special gifts to Jesus: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And these were very special gifts. You don't give these gifts to just somebody on the street or somebody you don't know. You give them to someone who's very, very special. How many gifts were there? There were 3 gifts. That's right. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, remember that mean king, they returned to their country by another route. So that's the story found in Matthew, and that's how I might read it with a child. Of course, you're welcome to point out things with your children that are in the house. You might have a nativity set that has Magi in it, and you could even have them act out the story. You might have a star on your nativity set or even on your tree, and you could point out that that's what guided the Magi to the baby. The point is, there were Magi. They wanted to find this new king who had been born. This king didn't look like the kings that probably Herod thought that were really going to take over, that was going to take over his job. Instead, he was a baby that was born and put in a special place. In this story, they don't talk about the manger. They talk about a house, so it was probably a little bit later. But you get to see that there was a baby Jesus, or a child Jesus, that was born. The Magi went to go find the king who was Jesus, and they brought him very special gifts. So that's the story found in Matthew.